The police officers doubled over with laughter as they shoved the dirty old beggar into the back of their patrol car. His ragged clothes smelled of garbage and his gray beard was matted with filth. One officer held his nose while the other made jokes about giving the homeless man a free ride to the five-star hotel they called the county jail. "Look at this guy," Officer Davis snorted, pointing at the beggar's torn shoes held together with duct tape. "Bet he hasn't showered in months." His partner, Officer Williams, grinned as he slammed the car door. "Another bum thinking he owns the sidewalk. Downtown doesn't need trash like this." But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just any homeless man. Hidden beneath those dirty rags was someone powerful. Someone who would make them regret every cruel word. Someone whose true identity would turn their laughter into horror. As the patrol car pulled away from the curb, the old man sat quietly in the back seat. His wrinkled hands were cuffed behind him, but his eyes held a strange calmness. A small smile played at the corner of his cracked lips. He knew something the officers didn't. And when the truth finally came out, it would shake the entire police department to its core. But how did this powerful man end up dressed as a beggar? What was he doing on that street corner? And why did he let himself get arrested without fighting back? To understand this shocking moment, we need to go back 3 months earlier. Robert Mitchell had once been one of the most respected men in the city. At 68 years old, he had built Mitchell Industries from nothing into a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His factories employed over 5,000 workers. His donations had built hospitals and schools. Mayors and governors called him for advice. His name appeared on buildings all across town. But Robert had a problem that all his money couldn't fix. His son James had been murdered 2 years ago, and the police still hadn't found the killer. James Mitchell had been a good man just like his father. He ran a charity that fed homeless people and helped them find jobs. He spent his weekends serving food at shelters and talking to people who lived on the streets. James believed everyone deserved respect no matter how poor they were. One cold November night, James was walking back to his car after volunteering at a downtown shelter. Someone attacked him in a dark alley. They beat him and left him to die. When the police found James the next morning, it was too late. Robert was destroyed. He cried every day for months. He couldn't eat or sleep. His wife had died 5 years earlier from cancer, and now his only son was gone too. The police investigated, but they didn't seem to care very much. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Morrison, barely returned Robert's phone calls. "Mr. Mitchell, we're doing everything we can," Detective Morrison would say with a bored voice. "But these things take time. Your son was in a rough neighborhood. Bad things happen there. Bad things." Robert's voice shook with anger. "My son was helping people. He was making the world better. And you're treating his murder like it doesn't matter." "I didn't say that, sir. I'm just saying we have limited resources. We'll call you if we find anything." But months passed and they found nothing. Or maybe they just stopped looking. Robert began to suspect the truth. The police didn't care because James died in the homeless district. They saw him as just another victim in a part of town they wanted to ignore. Robert made dozens of phone calls to the police chief. He offered reward money. He hired private detectives. But nothing worked. The case went cold. James's killer was still out there walking free. That's when Robert decided to do something crazy. Something dangerous. Something that would change his life forever. He would become homeless himself. If the police wouldn't investigate the streets where James died, then Robert would do it himself. He would live among the homeless people his son had loved so much. He would ask questions, listen to stories, and find out what really happened that terrible night. Someone on those streets had to know something. Someone had seen something. So Robert Mitchell, the millionaire businessman, gave up everything. He stopped going to his office. He told his secretary he was taking a long vacation. He didn't tell anyone his real plan because they would have tried to stop him. Then one Monday morning he put on the oldest, dirtiest clothes he could find. He rubbed dirt on his face and messed up his hair. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. "James?" he whispered to his reflection. "I'm going to find out who did this to you. I promise." For 3 months Robert lived on the streets. He slept in cardboard boxes and under bridges. He ate at soup kitchens and dug through dumpsters for food. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. His back ached from sleeping on concrete. His stomach hurt from hunger. In winter the cold bit through his thin clothes and made his bones feel like ice. But he kept going. He talked to dozens of homeless people. Most were kind and shared what little they had. They told him their stories of how they ended up on the streets. Lost jobs. Medical bills. Addictions. Bad luck. Robert learned that many homeless people were just regular folks who had faced terrible circumstances. He also learned how the police treated them. Officers would kick them awake and tell them to move along. They would dump out their food and take their blankets. They would arrest them for sleeping in public or for asking people for spare change. The police saw homeless people as problems to be removed, not human beings who needed help. Robert watched all of this with growing anger. Is this how they treated James too? Did they see his son as just another street person not worth protecting? Then 2 weeks ago, Robert finally got the break he was searching for. An old homeless man named Walter told him something important. "You asking about that young man who got killed 2 years back?" Walter had said, his toothless mouth chewing on a piece of bread. "The one who used to run the charity?" Robert's heart nearly stopped. "Yes. James Mitchell. Did you know him?" "Sure did. Nice kid. Always treated us with respect." Walter looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "I saw something that night. I was sleeping in that alley when it happened." "What did you see?" Robert grabbed Walter's arm. "Please tell me." "It was 2 men. They was wearing nice clothes, not street clothes. They had a argument with that boy about something. Then they started hitting him. I was too scared to help. I'm sorry. I'm just an old man, you know?" "Did you tell the police this?" Walter laughed bitterly. "I tried. I went to the station the next day. But the cops at the front desk just laughed at me. Said I was probably drunk and imagining things. They wouldn't even write down what I saw. Said homeless people ain't reliable witnesses." Robert felt rage burn through his chest. The police had a witness, but they ignored him because he was homeless. They could have caught James's killers 2 years ago, but they didn't care enough to listen. "Did you recognize these men?" Robert asked urgently. "Could you identify them?" "One of them, yeah. I seen him around before. Name's Tommy Briggs. He's some kind of drug dealer, works for a bigger operation. Real mean guy." Finally Robert had a name. A lead. Something real. He spent the next 2 weeks asking about Tommy Briggs. Other homeless people knew him too. They said he sold drugs in the area and sometimes hurt people who got in his way. But why would he attack James? What argument could they have had? Robert investigated more and discovered something shocking. Tommy Briggs's drug operation was using the homeless shelter where James volunteered. They were dealing drugs right outside the building and sometimes inside it. James must have found out. He must have threatened to report them to the police. So they killed him to keep him quiet. Robert now knew who murdered his son and why. But he had a problem. He had no proof. Just stories from homeless people, and the police wouldn't listen to homeless witnesses. They'd already proven that when they ignored Walter. Robert needed evidence. Real, solid evidence that even the police couldn't ignore. So he came up with a risky plan. He would get Tommy Briggs to confess. He would record it somehow, then take it to the authorities. But Tommy was dangerous and suspicious. How could Robert get close to him? That's when Robert made his biggest mistake. 3 days ago he saw Tommy Briggs dealing drugs on a street corner. Robert, still disguised as a homeless beggar, approached him carefully. He pretended to want to buy drugs, hoping to start a conversation. But Tommy was smarter than Robert expected. He got suspicious when Robert asked too many questions. Tommy grabbed Robert by his dirty shirt and shoved him against a wall. "You're not a regular customer," Tommy snarled. "Who are you? You a cop? You wearing a wire?" "No. I'm nobody. Just a street person." Robert tried to stay calm, but his heart pounded with fear. Tommy searched Robert's pockets roughly. He didn't find a wire, but he found something else. A small notebook where Robert had been writing down information about his investigation. Names, dates, details about James's murder. Tommy's eyes went wide as he read the notes. Then his face turned dark with rage. "You're investigating the Mitchell murder?" Tommy's voice was deadly quiet. "You're working for someone. Maybe the rich father? Where is he? Did he send you?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Robert tried to lie, but Tommy wasn't fooled. "You made a big mistake, old man." Tommy shoved Robert hard to the ground. "Real big mistake." Tommy pulled out his phone and made a call. Within minutes 2 of his friends arrived. They were big, mean-looking men who cracked their knuckles and smiled nastily. "We're gonna take you somewhere quiet," Tommy said, "and we're gonna find out who you really are and who sent you. Then we're gonna make sure you can't tell nobody nothing." They were about to drag Robert into a van when suddenly sirens wailed nearby. 2 police cars came around the corner. For once, Robert was actually happy to see the police. They had saved his life without knowing it. But Tommy Briggs and his men ran away before the officers could see them. They disappeared into the maze of alleys, leaving Robert alone on the sidewalk, his clothes torn and his notebooks scattered across the pavement. The police got out of their cars. Officers Davis and Williams, The same two who would arrest Robert later, approached him with disgusted looks on their faces. "What's going on here?" Officer Davis demanded. Robert was breathing hard, his heart still racing from the close call. "Those men were going to hurt me. They ran that way. You have to catch them." Officer Williams picked up Robert's notebook from the ground. He flipped through it, squinting at Robert's handwriting. "What's all this? You writing stories or something?" "It's evidence. About a murder. The James Mitchell case from 2 years ago." Both officers burst out laughing. "Did you hear that?" Officer Davis elbowed his partner. "This crazy homeless guy thinks he's a detective." "Please, you have to listen to me," Robert pleaded. "I have information about." "Save it." Officer Williams tossed the notebook back at Robert. It landed in a puddle, the pages getting soaked and ruined. All Robert's notes, all his careful investigation, destroyed in seconds. "We don't have time for homeless people and their fantasy stories. But those men. We didn't see no men. Just you causing a disturbance." Officer Davis stepped closer, looking down at Robert with cold eyes. "You need to move along. Get out of this neighborhood. This is a public street. I have a right." "You got no rights." Officer Williams grabbed Robert's arm roughly. "Except the right to remain silent. You're under arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace." "What? I wasn't doing anything illegal." But the officers didn't care. They forced Robert's arms behind his back and clicked handcuffs onto his wrists. The metal bit into his skin. Then they dragged him toward their patrol car, laughing and making jokes the whole time about how bad he smelled. That's when we return to the beginning of our story. The moment when the officers shoved Robert into the back seat, still mocking him, still treating him like garbage. Not knowing that this dirty old beggar was actually one of the richest, most powerful men in the city. Not knowing that their careers were about to be destroyed. As the car drove toward the police station, Robert sat in the back seat thinking hard. His investigation was ruined. His notebook was destroyed. Tommy Briggs now knew someone was after him and would be more careful than ever. But Robert wasn't giving up. He had spent 3 months on the streets. He had suffered cold and hunger and pain. He had done all of this for James and he wouldn't stop now. Somehow he would use this arrest to his advantage. He would find a way to expose not just his son's killers, but also the corrupt police department that let them get away with murder. The patrol car pulled up to the police station. Officers Davis and Williams yanked Robert out of the back seat and pushed him toward the building. Other officers saw them coming and started laughing too. "Nice catch, guys," one officer called out. "Taking out the trash." "Book him for stinking up the city," another one joked. They dragged Robert through the station doors and toward the booking desk. The sergeant behind the desk looked up and wrinkled his nose. "Ugh, another homeless one? Process him quick and get him out of here. The whole place is gonna smell." Officer Davis shoved Robert forward. "Found this one causing trouble downtown. Says he's investigating a murder." He said the last word in a mocking, spooky voice, making the other officers laugh. "A detective, huh?" The desk sergeant grinned. "What's your name, Sherlock Holmes?" Robert looked at all the laughing faces around him. These were the people who were supposed to protect citizens. These were the people who ignored witnesses and let murderers go free. These were the people who saw human beings as trash. Robert felt all his rage and grief from the past 2 years rise up inside him. He had been patient. He had been careful. But now, at this moment, he was done hiding. "My name," Robert said in a clear, strong voice that didn't sound like a beggar at all, "is Robert Mitchell." The laughter stopped instantly. Every officer in the room froze. They knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. "And I've been living on your streets for 3 months investigating my son's murder. A murder your department gave up on because you don't care about poor people. A murder that a homeless man witnessed, but you wouldn't listen to him." Officer Davis's face went white. But you're not, that's impossible." "I am exactly who I say I am." Robert's eyes were fierce. "And when I make one phone call to my lawyer, every single one of you is going to wish you had treated me better. You're going to wish you had done your jobs. You're going to wish." Suddenly, the doors to the station burst open with a loud bang. Everyone turned to look. Tommy Briggs stood in the doorway holding a gun. Tommy Briggs pointed the gun straight at Robert. His eyes were wild with rage and fear. Behind him, his 2 large friends blocked the doorway, also holding weapons. "Nobody move," Tommy shouted. His hand shook, making the gun wave dangerously through the air. "I came here to finish what I started." The police station exploded into chaos. Officers dove behind desks and pulled out their own guns. Someone hit an alarm button, and a loud siren began wailing through the building. People screamed. Papers flew everywhere as desks were knocked over. Robert stood frozen at the booking desk, his hands still cuffed behind his back. He couldn't run. He couldn't protect himself. He could only watch as Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger. "You ruined everything." Tommy screamed at Robert. "You just couldn't leave it alone. You couldn't let the past stay buried." Officer Williams, who had been laughing at Robert just moments ago, now crouched behind a filing cabinet. His face was green with terror. This was real danger, not just a harmless homeless man he could bully. "Drop your weapon," the desk sergeant yelled at Tommy, his own gun raised. "You're surrounded. There's no way out." Tommy laughed, but it was a crazy sound with no humor in it. "You think I care? You think I'm walking out of here? I'm already dead. But I'm taking him with me." He pointed at Robert again. In that terrible moment, Robert thought about James. His beautiful son who had wanted to help people. His boy who had died in a dark alley because he tried to do the right thing. Was Robert going to die the same way? Before he could even bring James's killer to justice? "Wait!" Robert shouted. His voice cut through the chaos. "Before you shoot me, tell me why. Why did you kill my son?" Tommy's eye twitched. Sweat dripped down his face. "Your son was a problem. He found out about our operation at the shelter. He was going to report us. We couldn't let that happen. So you murdered him? A man who only wanted to help people. He should have minded his own business." Tommy's voice cracked. "We warned him. We told him to stay quiet. But he wouldn't listen. He said he had a moral obligation." Tommy spat the words like they were poison. "Moral obligation? What about my obligation to survive? To make money? Your son and his morals were going to put me in prison." Robert felt tears running down his dirty face. Hearing the truth finally after 2 long years broke something inside him. But it also made him stronger. "There are cameras in here," Robert said quietly. "Cameras recording everything. You just confessed to murder Tommy. Even if you kill me now, they have your confession." Tommy's eyes darted around the room. He saw the security cameras mounted in the corners, their red lights blinking. His face went even paler. "You're lying. You're trying to trick me." "I'm not lying." Robert's voice was steady now, calm even with a gun pointed at his heart. "It's over, Tommy. You lost. Turn yourself in. At least do one decent thing in your life." For a long moment, nobody breathed. The whole police station was silent except for the wailing alarm. Tommy's gun hand shook harder. His friends looked at each other nervously like they were thinking about running. Then Tommy's face twisted with rage. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me." He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was so loud it hurt everyone's ears. Robert closed his eyes, waiting for the pain. But it never came. Officer Davis had tackled Robert to the ground just in time. The bullet smashed into the wall behind where Robert had been standing, sending chunks of plaster flying everywhere. "Get down. Stay down." Officer Davis covered Robert with his own body, protecting him. More gunshots rang out. The other police officers fired back at Tommy and his men. The station filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Glass shattered. People screamed. Tommy's 2 friends were hit immediately. They collapsed near the doorway, dropping their weapons. Tommy himself took a bullet in the shoulder and spun around, crashing into a bench. "Cease fire. Cease fire," the desk sergeant yelled. The shooting stopped. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. Through the smoke, Robert could see Tommy lying on the floor, bleeding but alive. His gun had fallen from his hand and slid across the tile floor. Police officers rushed forward and kicked the weapons away. They surrounded Tommy and his men, guns still pointed at them. Within seconds they had all 3 criminals in handcuffs. Officer Davis slowly got off Robert. His hands were shaking. "Are you hurt, Mr. Mitchell? Did any bullets hit you?" Robert was trembling all over, but he wasn't injured. No, I'm okay. You saved my life." Officer Davis's face was full of shame. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry for how we treated you. I didn't know. I should have listened." The desk sergeant ran over and quickly unlocked Robert's handcuffs. "Mr. Mitchell, I can't apologize enough. We made a terrible mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake." Robert rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been. His whole body ached from being thrown to the ground, but he was alive. And more importantly, Tommy Briggs had confessed to James's murder on camera in a police station full of witnesses. Paramedics rushed into the building to help the wounded criminals. More police cars arrived outside, their sirens adding to the noise. Officers ran everywhere, securing the scene and taking statements. Through all the chaos, Robert just sat on the floor, breathing hard. It was over. After 3 months of living on the streets, after all the cold nights and hungry days, after all the pain and fear, he finally had justice for James. A tall man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd of officers. He was in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. He looked at Robert sitting on the floor and his mouth fell open. Robert? Robert Mitchell? Is that really you? Robert looked up at Police Chief Henderson. They had met many times before at charity events and city functions. But the chief barely recognized him now, dressed in rags and covered in dirt. "Hello, Richard," Robert said tiredly. Chief Henderson knelt down beside him. "What in God's name happened to you? Where have you been? Your company said you went on vacation months ago, but then you never came back. People have been worried. I've been investigating my son's murder. The murder your department gave up on." The chief's face went red. "Robert, I promise you we never gave up. Don't lie to me, Richard." Robert's voice was hard as steel. "I lived on your streets for 3 months. I saw how your officers treat homeless people. Like they're not even human. Like their lives don't matter. A homeless man named Walter witnessed my son's murder, but your officers laughed at him when he tried to report it. They called him an unreliable drunk and wouldn't even write down his statement." Chief Henderson looked sick. I didn't know about that." "You should have known. That's your job." Robert stood up slowly, his legs shaking. "A witness came to this station and tried to help solve a murder, and your people turned him away because he was poor. If you had listened to Walter 2 years ago, you would have caught Tommy Briggs before he could hurt anyone else. But you didn't care enough to listen." Officers standing nearby heard every word. They looked at the floor, ashamed. Officer Davis was crying quietly, tears running down his face. "Mr. Mitchell," Officer Williams stepped forward. His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was wrong. What I said was cruel. I'm ready to turn in my badge right now if that's what you want." Robert looked at the young officer for a long moment. He could see genuine regret in Williams's eyes. "What I want is for you to remember this day. Remember what it felt like to discover that the dirty beggar you were mocking was a human being who deserved respect. Remember that every homeless person you meet from now on could be someone's son, someone's father, someone who matters." "I will, sir. I swear I will. And I want you to find Walter, the homeless man who witnessed my son's murder. I want you to take his statement properly this time. I want you to treat him like the valuable witness he is. Can you do that?" Officer Williams nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yes, sir. I'll find him personally. I'll make sure he's treated right." Chief Henderson stood up and put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "Robert, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make this right. I'm going to launch a full investigation into how this department handles cases involving homeless victims and witnesses. I'm going to implement new training for all officers about treating every person with dignity, regardless of their situation. And I'm going to make sure James's case is finally, properly closed." "Tommy Briggs confessed on camera," Robert said. "You have everything you need." "We do. Thanks to you." The chief's voice was filled with respect. "You did what we should have done 2 years ago. You didn't give up on your son." An EMT approached Robert with a medical kit. "Sir, you need to be checked out. You might be in shock. And you have some cuts and bruises that need attention." Robert let the EMT lead him to an ambulance outside. As he stepped through the police station doors, he saw news vans pulling up. Reporters were jumping out with cameras and microphones. Somehow, word had already spread that millionaire Robert Mitchell had been found after disappearing for 3 months. "Mr. Mitchell! Mr. Mitchell!" reporters shouted. "Where have you been? Is it true you were living on the streets? Is it true you solved your son's murder?" Police officers held the reporters back while Robert climbed into the ambulance. The EMT closed the doors, blocking out the noise and chaos. In the quiet ambulance, Robert finally allowed himself to feel everything. He cried for James. He cried for all the homeless people he had met who were treated like they didn't matter. He cried from exhaustion and relief and grief that would never fully go away. But mixed with the sadness was something else. Pride. James would be proud of what his father had done. Proud that Robert had lived among the people James had loved and tried to help. Proud that Robert had brought his killers to justice. The EMT cleaned Robert's cuts and checked his vital signs. "Your blood pressure is high, which is normal given what you just went through. But you're dehydrated and malnourished. You've lost a lot of weight. We should take you to the hospital for a full checkup." "No hospital," Robert said. "Take me home. I just want to go home. Sir, I really think. Please. I've been away from home for 3 months. I need to sleep in my own bed. The EMT sighed but nodded. He gave the driver Robert's address, and the ambulance pulled away from the police station. As they drove through the city, Robert looked out the window at the streets he had been walking for months. He saw homeless people huddled in doorways and sleeping on benches. Before his 3 months undercover, he had barely noticed them. They had been invisible to him, just part of the city background. But now he saw them as individuals. That man in the torn coat might be a veteran with PTSD. That woman with the shopping cart might be running from an abusive husband. That teenager begging for change might have been kicked out by parents who didn't accept who they were. James had seen them all along. That's why he spent his time helping them. And now Robert saw them too. When the ambulance pulled up to Robert's mansion, the driver whistled. "This is your house?" Robert looked at his enormous home with its perfect lawn and tall iron gates. It seemed like a different world from the streets he had been living on. In some ways, it was a different world. "Yes, this is my house." The EMT helped Robert out of the ambulance and walked him to the front door. Robert's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, opened the door and gasped. "Mr. Mitchell." "Oh my lord, Mr. Mitchell." She grabbed him in a tight hug, not even caring about his dirty clothes. "We've been so worried. Where have you been?" "It's a long story, Mrs. Chen. I'll tell you everything. But first, I need a very long shower and some real food." Mrs. Chen ushered him inside, fussing over him like a mother hen. The EMT left after making Robert promise to see a doctor within the next day or two. Robert stood in his grand entrance hall, looking at the marble floors and crystal chandelier. Everything was exactly as he had left it 3 months ago. But he was different. He had changed in ways he was still trying to understand. He went upstairs to his bedroom and stood under the shower for almost an hour, washing away 3 months of dirt and street life. When he finally got out, he barely recognized his own reflection. He had lost at least 30 pounds. His face was thin and weathered. His eyes looked older, sadder, but also somehow wiser. Mrs. Chen had laid out clean clothes for him and prepared a simple meal of soup and bread. Robert's stomach had shrunk from months of small meals, so he could only eat a little bit. But it tasted like heaven. That night, Robert slept in his own bed for the first time in 3 months. The mattress felt incredibly soft after so many nights on concrete and cardboard. But he couldn't fall asleep right away. His mind was too full of everything that had happened. He thought about Tommy Briggs's confession. About Officer Davis saving his life. About all the homeless people he had met and the stories they had shared. About James and the legacy of kindness he had left behind. Robert made a decision. He wouldn't just go back to his old life and pretend the last 3 months hadn't happened. He was going to do something big. Something that would honor James's memory and help the people his son had cared about. But he didn't know yet that his journey was far from over. He didn't know that Tommy Briggs, even from a hospital bed with a police guard at his door, was planning something terrible. He didn't know that the danger wasn't finished. He didn't know that tomorrow morning would bring a phone call that would change everything again. Robert finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted and believing the worst was behind him. He was wrong. At that exact moment, in a hospital room across town, Tommy Briggs was whispering to a nurse who didn't look like a real nurse at all. Her hospital uniform was real, but her cold eyes and the way she kept glancing at the guard outside the door told a different story. "You know what to do," Tommy whispered through teeth clenched in pain. His shoulder wound throbbed, but hatred burned even hotter. "Mitchell thinks he won. But this isn't over. Not even close." The fake nurse nodded slightly. She pulled out a phone and sent a quick text message to someone. In the message was Robert Mitchell's home address and a single word, "Tonight." Outside Robert's mansion, 3 cars pulled up quietly in the darkness. Men dressed in black got out, carrying weapons and tools. They looked at the tall iron gates and the security cameras. One of them smiled. Rich people always think they're safe behind their walls and cameras. They never expect what's coming. They split up, moving silently through the shadows toward different entrances of the property. They had studied the mansion's layout. They knew where the security system controls were. They knew which window was easiest to break. Most importantly, they knew exactly where Robert Mitchell's bedroom was located. Inside the house, Robert slept deeply, dreaming of James as a little boy, laughing and running through a park. In the dream, James turned to his father and said, "Be careful, Dad. It's not over yet." Robert's eyes snapped open in the darkness. His heart was pounding. Something felt wrong. Then he heard it. The tiniest sound of breaking glass somewhere downstairs. Someone was in his house. Robert's heart hammered in his chest as he lay frozen in bed. The sound of breaking glass echoed through his mind. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was definitely in his house. He slowly pushed back the covers and slid out of bed, trying not to make any noise. His legs still ached from 3 months of sleeping on streets, but fear gave him strength. He crept to his bedroom door and pressed his ear against it. Footsteps. Multiple people. They were coming up the stairs. Robert's mind raced. His cell phone was charging across the room on his dresser. The bedroom door had a lock, but it wouldn't hold against determined intruders. He had maybe 30 seconds before they reached his room. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. Someone's broken into my home, Robert whispered urgently. Multiple intruders. I need help now. My name is Robert Mitchell and my address is. His bedroom door exploded inward. 3 men in black masks rushed in, knocking the door off its hinges. One of them grabbed Robert and threw him against the wall. His phone flew from his hand and shattered on the floor. Going somewhere, old man? The tallest intruder growled. He pressed a knife against Robert's throat. Tommy Briggs sends his regards. Robert's blood turned to ice. Even from a hospital bed under police guard, Tommy had found a way to reach him. What do you want? Robert tried to keep his voice steady, but it shook with fear. What do we want? The man laughed cruelly. We want you to understand that you made a big mistake. You should have stayed in your mansion and left things alone. But you had to play detective. You had to ruin Tommy's life. Now he's going to ruin yours. The police are coming, Robert said. I called them. They heard everything. Yeah, we know. That's why we're not staying long. The man nodded to his partners. Search the house. Take everything valuable. Then we burn it down with him inside. The other 2 men ran out of the room to ransack the mansion. Robert could hear them smashing things and pulling open drawers. They were destroying his home, destroying all his memories of James and his late wife. You don't have to do this, Robert pleaded. Tommy killed my son. Don't you understand? I'm just a father who wanted justice. I don't care about your sob story. The man pressed the knife harder against Robert's skin. A tiny trickle of blood ran down Robert's neck. Tommy pays me to do a job and I do it. Nothing personal. Suddenly there was a loud crash from downstairs. Then shouting. Then gunshots. The man holding Robert spun around in confusion. What the? More gunshots. More shouting. The sounds of a fight. Police, drop your weapons. Robert's heart soared. The police had arrived incredibly fast. Maybe they had been patrolling nearby after everything that happened at the station. Maybe his 911 call had been flagged as priority because of who he was. The man holding Robert cursed and pulled him toward the bedroom window. You're coming with me. You're my ticket out of here. He dragged Robert across the room, the knife still at his throat. They could hear police officers storming up the stairs, their footsteps pounding on the wood. Don't make this worse, Robert gasped. Let me go and surrender. You can still walk away alive. Shut up. The man reached the window and looked out. They were on the 2nd floor. Too high to jump safely. He was trapped. The bedroom door frame filled with police officers, their guns pointed directly at the intruder. Release the hostage. It was Officer Davis, the same officer who had saved Robert's life earlier that day. His face was fierce and determined. There's nowhere to go. It's over. The man tightened his grip on Robert. Back off or I'll kill him. I swear I'll do it. You kill him and you die 2 seconds later, Officer Davis said calmly. Is that really how you want this to end? For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Robert could feel the man's hand shaking. The knife blade trembled against his skin. One wrong move and his throat would be cut. Then from somewhere deep in the house came a woman's scream. Mrs. Chin. Robert's blood boiled. These criminals had threatened his housekeeper, a kind woman who had worked for his family for 20 years. The same rage that had kept him going through 3 months on the streets suddenly exploded inside him. Before he could think about it, Robert drove his elbow backward into the man's stomach as hard as he could. The man grunted in pain and loosened his grip just slightly. It was enough. Robert twisted away from the knife and dropped to the floor. Officer Davis didn't hesitate. He fired his weapon once, hitting the intruder in the leg. The man screamed and fell, his knife clattering across the floor. Other officers rushed in and tackled him, forcing his arms behind his back and snapping on handcuffs. Within seconds the threat was over. Officer Davis helped Robert to his feet. Are you hurt, Mr. Mitchell? Robert touched his neck where the knife had been. His fingers came away with a small amount of blood, but it was just a scratch. I'm okay. But Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, I heard her scream. She's fine, sir. She's downstairs with the paramedics. Just scared but not injured. We got here before anyone could hurt her. Relief flooded through Robert. He sagged against Officer Davis, suddenly exhausted. How did you get here so fast? After what happened at the station today, Chief Henderson assigned a protection detail to watch your house. We were parked down the street when we saw the intruders break in. We called for backup and moved in immediately. More officers dragged the other 2 intruders out of various rooms. All 3 criminals were now in custody, and none of them were seriously hurt except for bullet wounds in non-lethal areas. Officer Williams appeared in the doorway. Sir, we searched the whole house. No other intruders. You're safe now. Robert nodded, but his legs felt like water. He had been so close to death twice in one day. How much more could he take? The paramedics insisted on checking Robert again, especially the cut on his neck. They cleaned it and put a small bandage over it. Then they checked on Mrs. Chen, who was crying but otherwise unharmed. Mr. Mitchell, I was so frightened. She grabbed his hand. When I heard the glass break, I hid in the pantry and called the police. I'm so sorry I couldn't do more. You did exactly right, Mrs. Chen. You saved both our lives by calling for help. Chief Henderson arrived at the mansion 20 minutes later. He looked exhausted and angry. Robert, I can't apologize enough. Tommy Briggs arranged this attack from his hospital bed. He used a burner phone we didn't know he had hidden on him. We're increasing security on him now, but the damage is done. It's not your fault, Richard. Robert sat down heavily on his couch. The living room was destroyed. Drawers were pulled out, furniture was overturned, and precious items were broken. But he was alive, and that's what mattered. We're going to add more charges against Tommy Briggs, the chief continued. Attempted murder, conspiracy, hiring criminals. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. I promise you that. Good. Robert looked around at his destroyed home. But I want something else too. Name it. I want to create a foundation. The James Mitchell Foundation. It will help homeless people get back on their feet. Job training, housing assistance, mental health services, everything they need. And I want part of the foundation to be a special unit that investigates crimes against homeless people, because I know now that regular police don't always take those cases seriously. Chief Henderson looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. That's fair. And I want to help. The police department will partner with your foundation. We'll assign officers to work specifically on cases involving homeless victims. We'll train all our officers better. We'll make sure what happened to James and to Walter never happens again. I'll hold you to that promise, Richard. Over the next few days, news of Robert's 3 months undercover on the streets spread across the entire country. Newspapers wrote articles about the millionaire who disguised himself as a beggar to solve his son's murder. Television shows interviewed people who had met Robert during his time homeless and didn't know who he really was. Walter, the homeless man who witnessed James's murder, was finally treated like the important witness he was. Officer Williams personally found him and took his full statement. Walter testified against Tommy Briggs at trial, and his testimony was crucial in convicting Tommy of first-degree murder. The 2 officers who had laughed at Robert and arrested him, Davis and Williams, both went through intensive retraining. But more than that, they became advocates for better treatment of homeless people. Officer Davis started volunteering at shelters on his days off. Officer Williams joined the special unit that worked with Robert's foundation. Tommy Briggs was convicted on multiple charges: the murder of James Mitchell, attempted murder of Robert Mitchell, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As they led him out of the courtroom in chains, Tommy looked at Robert one last time. You destroyed my life, Tommy said bitterly. Robert looked him straight in the eye. No. You destroyed your own life when you chose to hurt innocent people. My son wanted to help people like you and you killed him for it. You brought this on yourself. Tommy looked away and Robert never saw him again. The James Mitchell Foundation officially launched 6 months later. Robert donated $50 million to get it started, and other wealthy people in the city contributed as well. The foundation opened 3 shelters, started job training programs, and hired counselors to help people struggling with addiction and mental health issues. But the most important part of the foundation was the Dignity Project. Robert hired former homeless people to work as advocates and investigators. They went to police stations and made sure officers were taking reports from homeless witnesses seriously. They followed up on cases involving homeless victims. They made sure that poor people got the same justice as rich people. Walter became one of the first advocates hired by the foundation. Despite being homeless himself, he had a sharp mind and a good heart. Robert gave him a small apartment and a salary, and Walter worked tirelessly to help others in the situation he had been in. "You gave me back my dignity," Walter told Robert at the foundation's opening ceremony. "For years people looked right through me like I was invisible. Like I didn't matter. Your son James never did that. He always saw me as a person. And now you're doing the same thing. Thank you." Robert hugged the old man, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up about what you saw. Thank you for helping me find justice for James. You're a hero, Walter." The foundation grew quickly. Within a year, it had helped over 500 people find jobs and housing. Crime against homeless people in the city dropped by 40% because police were finally investigating those cases properly. Other cities started copying the foundation's model and creating their own programs. Robert never moved back into his mansion. After the break-in, it didn't feel like home anymore. Instead, he sold it and bought a modest house in a regular neighborhood. He used the money from selling the mansion to expand the foundation even more. He spent his days working at the foundation's main office, which was located right in the downtown area where James had been killed. Every morning, Robert walked past the alley where his son had died. At first, it was painful. But over time, it became a reminder of why his work was so important. One year after Tommy Briggs was convicted, Robert stood at that alley with a group of city officials. They were unveiling a memorial to James Mitchell, a beautiful statue of a young man handing food to someone in need. "My son believed that every person has worth," Robert said to the crowd gathered for the ceremony. "He believed that how we treat the poorest among us shows who we really are as a society. He died trying to protect people that others had forgotten about." This memorial isn't just about remembering James. It's about remembering what he stood for. The crowd applauded. Among them were dozens of homeless people who James had helped and who Robert had lived among. They weren't pushed to the edges or told to leave. They were honored guests at the ceremony, standing right in front. After the ceremony, a young reporter approached Robert. "Mr. Mitchell, you've become a hero to many people. How does that feel?" Robert shook his head. "I'm not a hero. The real heroes are people like my son who spend their lives helping others. The real heroes are people like Walter who had the courage to speak up even when nobody wanted to listen. The real heroes are the police officers who learned from their mistakes and became better. I'm just a father who loved his son and wanted justice. But you gave up everything. You lived on the streets for 3 months. You nearly died multiple times. That's pretty heroic." "I did what any parent would do." Robert looked up at the statue of James, forever frozen in an act of kindness. "And I'd do it all again if I had to." As the sun set over the city, Robert walked back to his office. He had meetings scheduled with city council members about expanding the foundation's programs. He had calls to make to donors. He had work to do. But first he stopped at a small soup kitchen that the foundation ran. It was dinner time and homeless people were lining up for a hot meal. Robert grabbed an apron and joined the volunteers serving food. An old woman came through the line, her clothes ragged and her face weathered. She looked up at Robert as he spooned soup into her bowl. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome," Robert replied with a genuine smile. "And if you need any help beyond just a meal, we have counselors here who can talk to you about housing and jobs. You don't have to live on the streets." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You'd help someone like me? Someone like you is exactly who we're here to help. You matter. Your life matters." The woman took her soup and sat down to eat, crying softly. Robert watched her go and felt his heart swell. This was what James had felt when he helped people. This sense of purpose. This knowledge that you were making a real difference in someone's life. That night, Robert sat alone in his small house and looked at a photograph of James. It was his favorite picture, taken just a month before James died. In it, James was laughing at some joke, his eyes bright with joy and kindness. "I hope I made you proud, son," Robert whispered to the photograph. "I hope you're watching and you can see that your work didn't die with you. It's bigger now than it ever was. You're helping more people now than you ever could have alone." He could almost hear James's voice responding, "I'm proud of you, Dad. You didn't just find justice for me. You found justice for everyone." Robert smiled through his tears. The journey had been hard. He had suffered and nearly died. He had seen the worst of humanity in people like Tommy Briggs, but also the best of humanity in people like Officer Davis and Walter. He had learned that everyone deserves dignity, regardless of how much money they have or where they sleep at night. He had learned that real justice means fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. He had learned that sometimes the only way to see the truth is to walk in someone else's shoes, or in his case, to live in someone else's cardboard box. Most importantly, he had learned that love never dies. His love for James had driven him to do extraordinary things. And that love continued to drive him every single day as he worked to make the world a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more like the world James had dreamed of. Robert kissed the photograph and placed it back on the shelf. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to help, new battles to fight. But tonight, he could rest knowing that James's death had not been in vain. The police had laughed while arresting the old beggar. Their smiles had faded when his identity was revealed. But the story didn't end with their shock and shame. It ended with redemption, with change, with hope. It ended with a father's love transforming tragedy into triumph. And in a city that had once ignored its poorest citizens, people now stopped to talk to the homeless man on the corner. They donated to shelters. They volunteered at soup kitchens. They looked at people living on the streets and saw human beings instead of problems. All because one man had been willing to give up everything to seek justice. All because one man had refused to let the world forget his son. Robert Mitchell closed his eyes and finally, truly, deeply slept in peace. The end.